My name is Raymond L.S. Whitfield. I am 64 years old. I've spent the better part of my adult life understanding the human body, how it heals, how it breaks, and how it can be betrayed. For 35 years, I practiced internal medicine at Carolina's Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I delivered difficult diagnoses with steady hands and a steady voice. I sat across from patients who had just received the worst news of their lives and found words that were true and kind and honest, all at the same time. I thought I understood betrayal. I was wrong. As I sat in that cold plastic chair at LabCorp on Randolph Road at 3:17 in the morning, holding a small orange prescription bottle in both hands, like it was evidence at a crime scene, because I felt something I had not felt since the night my wife, Gloria, passed away 7 years ago. I felt completely, devastatingly alone. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. A young technician behind the counter pretended not to stare. And I sat there, a man who had spent a lifetime reading lab results, unable to bring himself to open the envelope sitting on his lap. Because the person whose name was connected to what was inside that bottle was my daughter, my Camille. Before I take you back to the beginning, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever loved someone without condition, if you've ever trusted someone simply because you helped bring them into this world, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Because this story is for everyone who has ever had their love used against them. And I need to know you're here with me tonight. Let's go back. 6 weeks before that waiting room. 6 weeks before everything I thought I knew about my family collapsed like a house built on sand. It was a Tuesday evening in early January. The kind of cold that Charlotte rarely gets, sharp, biting. The type that makes the old oak trees in my front yard on Morningside Drive creak like they're complaining. I had just finished my second cup of Folgers and was watching the news when I heard the familiar sound of Camille's Volvo pulling into my driveway. I smiled before I even turned around. That's what fathers do. Camille Whitfield Graves was 36 years old. She had her mother's eyes, deep brown, warm as firelight, and she had inherited my stubbornness in equal measure. She had graduated from Spelman College in Atlanta back in 2011, something that still made me straighten my spine whenever I mentioned it to anyone. She married Darnell Graves 4 years ago, a man I had certain reservations about from the beginning, though I kept most of them to myself. He was charming in the way that men are when they are performing rather than being. He laughed too quickly at his own stories. He spoke about money in the way people do when they don't have enough of it but desperately want you to think they do. But Camille loved him, and she was my daughter. So I kept my reservations in a drawer, as fathers often do. "Daddy," she said, as she came through the door without knocking. She never knocked. Carrying a canvas, tote bag, and smelling like the lavender lotion she'd worn since she was in high school. She kissed me on the cheek and set the bag on the kitchen counter with a soft thud. "I brought you some things." "Things?" I repeated. "Vitamins, supplements." She was already unpacking the bag, lining up small bottles on my counter with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Doctor, Okafor told you at your last visit that your B12 was low, remember? And these omega-3 South are pharmaceutical grade." Darnell's cousin works for a wellness company out of Raleigh. I looked at the bottles. 7 in total, different shapes and sizes, all with clean white labels and professional fonts. I was a doctor. I knew my B12 was slightly low. I knew omega-3 South were beneficial. And I knew my daughter was standing in my kitchen with a smile that looked, I only understand this now, looking back, just slightly too wide. Just slightly too eager. "Baby, I appreciate this," I said, "but I have a perfectly good doctor. Dr. Okafor is wonderful, Daddy. This is just supplemental." No pun intended. She laughed. I laughed. We ate leftover chicken and rice that I'd made on Sunday, and she stayed for 2 hours, and when she left, she hugged me for a beat longer than usual. I started taking the supplements the next morning. The weeks that followed were, on the surface, the warmest stretch of time Camille and I had shared since her mother passed. She visited 3, sometimes 4 times a week. She brought food, always something home-cooked, or at least something she claimed was home-cooked. She brought fresh bottles when the old ones ran low. She asked me every time how I was feeling, with a specificity that I now understand was not concern, but monitoring. Are you sleeping okay? Any dizziness? How's your energy been, Daddy? I told her I was tired. She said it was the winter. I told her I felt a low hum of dizziness in the mornings. She said it was probably my blood pressure adjusting. I was a physician for 35 years. I had given those exact same non-answers to patients when I needed time to assess a situation. And I didn't catch it because she was my daughter, my oldest friend and former colleague, Dr. Harold Green. Harold and I had been friends since our residency days at Emory University Hospital back in 1989. Noticed something at our standing Thursday dinner at Mimosa Grill on South Tryon Street. Harold is an internist. He has eyes that have seen too much and a mind that never fully turns off. "Ray," he said, midway through his shrimp and grits. "You look gray." "I'm 64, Harold," I said. "We're all gray." "No." He put down his fork. "I mean, you look systemically gray. Your color is off. How long have you been fatigued?" "A few weeks. It's winter. I'm retired." "Are you taking anything new?" I mentioned the supplements. Something shifted in Harold's face. Not alarm, not yet, but the specific expression of a physician filing away information for later review. He asked me to describe the bottles. He asked me what Camille had said about the source. He asked me how I felt in the hours after taking them versus before. I thought nothing of it at the time. Harold was thorough. He was always thorough. 3 days later, at 11:40 p.m. on a Wednesday night, my phone rang. I was already in bed. I hadn't been sleeping well, hadn't slept well in weeks, though I'd been attributing it to the fatigue of retirement, to missing Gloria, to the creaking of the old house. I picked up on the second ring because Harold's name on the screen at that hour meant only one thing to me as a doctor. Something is wrong. "Harold, Ray." His voice was different. "Stripped. Are you alone?" "I'm in bed. Are you near the supplements Camille brought you?" My chest tightened. "They're in the kitchen cabinet. I need you to stop taking them tonight. Don't take anything else until we talk. Can you bring them to LabCorp on Randolph first thing tomorrow? I'll call ahead and have them run a full panel on the contents." I sat up in the dark. 35 years of medical training has a way of organizing shock into procedure. "Harold, what did you find?" A pause. The kind of pause that carries weight. "I had Renee run a quick screen on the sample I took from the bottle you left in your coat pocket last Thursday. Ray." His voice dropped. "There's digoxin in those capsules, and not a therapeutic dose. It's been building in your system. The room did not spin. I want to be clear about that. I am a man who has received and delivered devastating information in clinical settings for 3.5 decades, and my body has learned to go very still when the worst arrives. The room did not spin. My hands did not shake. I sat in the dark, and I breathed. Digoxin, a cardiac glycoside, used therapeutically in carefully calibrated doses for certain heart conditions. In the wrong doses, administered over weeks, it causes progressive cardiac toxicity, fatigue, dizziness, arrhythmia, and in a 64-year-old man with slightly elevated blood pressure and a mild B12 deficiency, a 64-year-old man whose medical history was on file, whose last physical had been documented, whose daughter knew exactly what his doctor had said at his last visit. It could look entirely like natural causes. "Ray," Harold said, "are you still there?" "I'm here." I said. Don't call anyone else tonight. I need to think. Raymond, Harold. My voice was steady. I made sure of it. I've spent my whole career telling patients that the first response to a diagnosis is never the right one. Let me think. I'll call you at 7. I hung up. I sat in my bedroom on Morningside Drive, in the house where I had raised my daughter, in the city where I had built everything I had built, and I allowed myself exactly 12 minutes to feel what I felt. Grief, not anger. Grief. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, put every bottle into a paper grocery bag, and drove to LabCorp on Randolph Road at 3 in the morning to wait for them to open at 4. And that is where we started. That waiting room, that envelope. Now you know why my hands were trembling. Let me tell you the rest. The report confirmed what Harold had found in his preliminary screen, and then it went further. 2 of the 7 bottles, the ones labeled Cardio Balance Pro and Daily Wellness Complex, both supposedly from Darnell's cousin's wellness company in Raleigh, contained digoxin concentrations that, taken as directed on the label, would deliver a cumulative toxic dose within 6 to 8 weeks. The other 5 bottles were exactly what they claimed to be. Clean, legitimate, probably purchased at a Whole Foods or online to make the overall package look coherent. Whoever designed this was not careless. This was not an impulsive act. This was a plan. I sat in my car in the LabCorp parking lot as the sun came up over Charlotte, reading the report with the glasses I kept in my glove compartment, and I made myself do what I had always told my patients to do before making any irreversible decision. I gathered all the information before drawing a conclusion. The wellness company on the label, Apex Vitality Solutions, LLC, listed at an address in Raleigh, did not appear in the North Carolina Secretary of State's business registry. I checked on my phone right there in the parking lot. The address was a UPS store on Falls of Noosh Road. The company did not exist in any verifiable license sense. And Darnell Graves, my son-in-law, who had allegedly gotten me supplements from his cousin at this company, Darnell, who I knew carried $340,000 in personal and business debt that Camille had mentioned, almost casually, at Thanksgiving dinner 2 months earlier. Darnell, who was the named beneficiary on a $1.2 million life insurance policy I had taken out in 2019. At Camille's gentle suggestion, because, Daddy, you should have something in place, just in case. I sat there a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that parking lot as the morning light came over Charlotte. I want to be honest because I think it matters. I did not feel rage. I know that is not what people expect from a story like this, and I understand why. But I was 64 years old, and I had watched enough human beings face the worst moments of their lives to know that rage is the most expensive emotion you can spend in a crisis. Rage makes you sloppy. Rage makes you loud. And when you are dealing with people who have been quiet and calculating for a very long time, the worst thing you can do is announce yourself before you are ready. What I felt was sorrow. Deep structural sorrow, the kind that settles into your bones. Because somewhere in the sequence of Darnell's debt and Camille's weekly visits and those 7 carefully selected bottles, my daughter had made a choice. And I had to decide what to do with that truth. I called Harold at 7, as I had promised. The report is what we thought, I said. Raymond, we need to go to the police. Not yet. Ray, Harold, I need 2 weeks. I need documentation. I need to understand the full picture before I hand this to anyone, because once I do, I lose control of what happens to my daughter. I paused. You and I both know that once law enforcement is involved, it becomes their case, their timeline, their decisions. I need 2 weeks. He was quiet for a long moment. 2 weeks, he said finally. And then we do this right, Ray. No exceptions. No exceptions, I agreed. And Harold, thank you. You saved my life. Don't thank me yet, he said softly. Thank me when this is over. I spent the next 14 days moving with the deliberate patience of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The first call I made was to my attorney, Reginald Ashworth of Ashworth & Cole on East 5th Street, a man I had known through our shared membership in Alpha Phi Alpha for over 2 decades. I told Reginald everything. He listened without interrupting. He had the rare gift of complete attention, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment before he said, Raymond, what you're describing is first-degree attempted homicide. You understand that? I understand that, I said. And you want to build the evidentiary foundation before involving law enforcement. I want to make sure that when this goes to trial, if it goes to trial, there is not a single hole in the case. I want the truth to be so complete, so documented, so airtight, that no one can diminish it or redirect it or make it about anything other than what it is. Reginald nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. Over the following days, Reginald engaged a private forensic accountant who began tracing the financial architecture of what Darnell had been building. What we found was patient in its construction and devastating in its detail. Over the 3 years since their marriage, Darnell had quietly shifted joint accounts, redirected a portion of Camille's teacher's salary from her position at Piedmont Middle School into a holding account he controlled, and taken out 2 additional personal loans using inflated statements of household assets that included the estimated value of my estate and my life insurance policy as anticipated inheritance. He had been borrowing against my death for years. The picture was becoming clear. Darnell was drowning in debt he had created through a series of failed real estate ventures in the Durham area. He needed a significant cash infusion. The life insurance policy was the answer he had found. And Camille, my daughter with her mother's eyes, had either been convinced, coerced, or had chosen on her own to become the instrument of that plan. I didn't know which yet, and that uncertainty was the heaviest weight I carried during those 2 weeks. If you are still watching this story, I want to pause here for just a moment, because what I am about to tell you is not about anger or revenge. It is about what you do when the ground gives way beneath everything you trusted. What would you do? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if this story is speaking to something in your experience, please share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. On the 9th day, I did something that required more from me than any medical procedure I had ever performed. I invited Camille to dinner. I cooked the meal myself. Braised short ribs with collard greens and cornbread, her favorite since she was 7 years old. I set the table properly, with the good china that Gloria had picked out at a shop in the South End neighborhood back in 1994. I put on Marvin Gaye low on the speaker in the corner, and when Camille walked through the door and said, "Daddy, it smells amazing in here," I smiled at her and meant it, in the specific way that you can love someone and mourn them at the same time. We ate together. We talked about her students. She taught 8th grade history, and she was genuinely good at it, the kind of teacher who changed children's trajectories, and I held on to that truth about her through the whole meal. We talked about a road trip she was planning with her girlfriends in the spring, 3 women she had known since Spelman. We talked about her mother. And then, near the end of the meal, she reached into her bag and produced 2 new bottles. "I reordered from Darnell's cousin," she said, sliding them across the table toward me. "The Cardio Balance Pro and the Daily Wellness Complex. I know you were running low." I looked at the bottles. I looked at my daughter's face. And I said, very gently, "Baby, I've actually been taking a break from supplements for a few weeks. My doctor wants to run some panels first." Something moved across her face, fast, and then gone. She covered it with a smile. "Oh, of course. That makes sense, Daddy. Leave them here, though," I said. "I'll start back up when Dr. Okafor gives the green light." She left them. And the next morning, Reginald received the second set of sealed, laboratory-certified test results documenting the contents of 2 newly manufactured capsules from a freshly sourced batch, confirming that the formula had not changed. The case was complete. On the 14th day, I called Harold Green at 7 in the morning, exactly as I had promised. "It's time," I said. "I'll meet you at Reginald's office at 9, he replied. No hesitation, no questions. That is what 35 years of friendship looks like. It moves without needing to be explained. Reginald Ashworth's office on East 5th Street occupied the 4th floor of a building that had housed black-owned law firms in Charlotte since the 1970s. The walls carried photographs of men and women who had fought for things that mattered in this city, and I always felt, sitting in that office, that I was in the presence of something larger than my own personal situation. That morning, I needed that feeling more than I could say. We sat, Reginald, Harold, and I, around the conference table with 3 things in front of us: the original LabCorp toxicology report, the second laboratory certification from the freshly sourced batch, and a 47-page financial forensics document that Reginald's accountant had assembled over the previous 10 days. Reginald walked us through the legal framework with the calm precision of a man who had spent 40 years turning complex truths into airtight arguments. When he finished, he folded his hands on the table and looked at me. "Raymond," he said, "I want to ask you one question before we proceed. Not as your attorney, as your friend. Go ahead. Do you believe Camille acted voluntarily? Or do you believe she was coerced by Darnell?" I had been sitting with that question for 14 days. I had turned it over every morning when I woke up and every night before I tried to sleep. I had thought about the daughter who used to fall asleep in my lap during Sunday services at Little Rock Ames Zion Church on Beatty's Ford Road. I had thought about the young woman who called me crying from her dorm at Spelman when she failed her first college exam, and how I had driven 6 hours from Charlotte to Atlanta that same night, because I could not stand the sound of her hurting alone. And I had thought about the look on her face at dinner, that brief, fast, unguarded movement of expression when I declined the supplements, the look of a person checking on the status of a plan. "I believe," I said carefully, "that Darnell created the architecture. I believe he is the primary architect of this. But I also believe that Camille made a choice. People under pressure make choices. And the choice she made was to bring those bottles into my home, more than once, over a period of weeks. That is not passivity. That is participation." Reginald nodded slowly. "Then we proceed with both names." At 10:15 that morning, Reginald placed a call to Detective Sheila Moorman of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. He had worked with Detective Moorman on 2 prior cases and trusted her with the precise, evidence-forward approach that this situation required. He presented the case in summary form and asked her to come to his office rather than to my home, so that the first encounter between law enforcement and the evidence would be controlled and professional. Detective Moorman arrived at 11:40 a.m. with a colleague, and for the next 2 hours, they reviewed everything. She was thorough. She asked sharp questions. And when she finished going through the forensic accountant's report, she set it down and looked at me directly. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "this is one of the most methodically documented cases I have received in 19 years on this force. I spent 35 years in medicine," I said. "Documentation is a reflex. I want to tell you something about the hours between that meeting and what happened next, because I think it is the part of this story that people least expect." I went home. I sat in my living room in the afternoon light. I looked at the photographs on my mantelpiece. Gloria and me at our wedding at Little Rock Ames in 1987. Both of us young, and certain the way only the very young and the very in love can be. Camille at her Spelman graduation, her face wide open with the particular joy of someone who has just proven something to themselves. A family photo from a Thanksgiving at my sister Lorraine's house in Prince George's County, Maryland, maybe 15 years ago, everyone laughing at something I can no longer remember. I sat there for a long time, and I prayed. Not for justice, exactly. I prayed for clarity, for the ability to love my daughter through what was coming without losing myself in it, for the wisdom to understand that what was about to happen was not something I was doing to her. It was the consequence of what she had chosen to do. That is a distinction that sounds simple and is almost impossibly hard to hold on to when the person involved is someone you raised from nothing. Gloria had always been the theologian in our household. She kept a worn copy of the Bible on her nightstand with so many passages underlined that the pages had gone soft, and she had a particular love for the book of Galatians. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. She used to say that verse was not a threat. It was a description. The universe is not angry, she would say. It is simply honest. I thought about that as I sat in the afternoon light on Morningside Drive. Detective Mormon moved with the kind of quiet efficiency that serious cases demand. Within 48 hours of our meeting, she had verified the forensic accountant's findings through independent financial subpoenas. Within 72 hours, she had traced the source of the digoxin to a contact in Darnell's network, a man in Greensboro with a history of pharmaceutical fraud who had been under a separate investigation for 8 months. The thread, once pulled, unraveled with a speed that told me this plan had been held together more by audacity than by actual craft. On a Thursday morning, 17 days after Harold's phone call, Darnell Marcus Graves was arrested at the townhouse he and Camille rented in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte. He was charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, attempted murder, and insurance fraud. He was taken in a manner that the neighbors on that quiet street would discuss for a long time. Camille was not arrested that morning. Detective Mormon called me to explain why. In the 24 hours before the arrest, Camille had contacted Reginald Ashworth through a mutual contact. She had clearly sensed the walls closing, in the way that people who have been living inside a lie often do. And through Reginald, she had requested a conversation with investigators. She was, in the language of the legal system, cooperating. She had not acted alone, and she had not, ultimately, been willing to let the full weight of it land on herself without telling the truth about how it had started. I'm not going to tell you that information made it simple. It did not, but it mattered. Reginald called me on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the arrest, and told me that Camille wanted to see me, not through lawyers, not in any formal setting. She had asked, through Reginald, if I would be willing to meet her at the house on Morningside Drive. At home, I sat with that request for 2 days. On Sunday morning, I drove to Little Rock Ames Zion on Beatty's Ford Road, where I had been a member for 31 years, where Gloria and I had sat together every Sunday for 2 decades in the 4th pew on the left side, where the congregation had surrounded me after her funeral with the kind of love that you cannot manufacture and cannot forget. I sat through the service, and I let it do what it needed to do. Pastor Bridges preached from Luke that morning, the parable of the prodigal son, and I am not a man who believes in coincidence, so I paid attention. I called Reginald that afternoon and told him Camille could come on Tuesday evening. She arrived at 6 o'clock. She looked smaller than I remembered, which is something grief and fear do to a person. They reduce the architecture of the body somehow, compress it inward. She was wearing a gray coat and no makeup, and she looked, in a way that broke something open in me, very much like she had looked at 7 years old when she had done something wrong and was coming to tell me about it. She stood in the doorway of the house where she had grown up, and she said, "Daddy," and then she couldn't say anything else for a long moment. I stepped back and let her in, because I was her father, and that did not stop being true because of what she had done. The love did not stop. I want to be precise about that, because I think it is the most important and the most complicated part of this entire story. The love did not stop. But love and trust are not the same thing, and boundaries are not the absence of love. They are love protecting itself so it can survive. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten braised short ribs 3 weeks earlier. She told me everything. She told me how Darnell had first raised the idea as a hypothetical. What if your father had a heart event? Naturally, the policy would take care of everything, and how she had refused. How he had raised it again, framed differently and again and again, over a period of months, each time from a slightly different angle, until the monstrous thing had been normalized in small increments, the way monstrous things often are. She told me about the debt, about the phone calls from creditors, about Darnell telling her they would lose everything, about the fear that had become the water she was swimming in for so long that she couldn't see it anymore. And then she stopped. And she looked at me, and she said, "But I knew, Daddy. I need you to know that I knew what I was doing, and I did it anyway. And I'm sorry, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to tell you the truth to your face." The room was very quiet. I looked at my daughter for a long time. I thought about Gloria. I thought about the morning Camille was born at Carolina's medical center, the way she came into the world already loud and already certain, and how the doctor had placed her in my arms, and I had felt, for the first time in my life, that I understood what people meant when they talked about unconditional love. I thought about 36 years of choosing to love her through everything, through the difficult teenage years, through the mistakes, through the marriage I had reservations about but supported anyway. I said, "I know you knew, and I know you're sorry, and I am going to spend a very long time working through what that means for us." I paused. "But I want you to understand something. I am not angry at you in the way that destroys people. I am grieving for us, for what we could have been, for what we still might be, if you do the work and tell the truth to everyone who needs to hear it." She nodded. Tears came down her face steadily, without sound. "The truth is going to cost you a great deal," I said. "There is no version of this that is easy or quick, but it is the only currency that will ever rebuild anything between us. Do you understand that?" "Yes," she said. "Then tell it. All of it. To the investigators, to the lawyers, to the court. Every single piece of it. Not to protect yourself. Because it is true. And because the truth is the only thing that will allow you to become someone your mother would recognize." That was the last time I mentioned Gloria's name that evening. But I felt her in the room with us, the way I often do in that house, steady and patient as she had always been. I want to stop here for just a moment and ask you something directly. If you were in my position, if someone you had raised, someone whose whole life you had poured yourself into, had made the choice that Camille made, what would you do with the love that remained? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story has touched something in you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear that love and wisdom can hold their ground even when everything else gives way. The legal proceedings moved through the winter and into the spring. Darnell Marcus Graves was convicted on all 3 counts. He received a sentence of 22 years at the Lanesboro Correctional Institution in Polkton, North Carolina. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Simmons of Mecklenburg County Superior Court, noted in her sentencing remarks that the premeditated nature of the offense, targeting a vulnerable family member through a sustained campaign of deliberate poisoning, represented a particular betrayal of human trust that the court could not treat leniently. I was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. Reginald was there. Harold was there. I was at home on Morningside Drive, sitting in the garden that Gloria had planted 20 years ago, where the first crocuses of the year were beginning to come up through the February ground. Reginald texted me a single word when it was done. Done. I sat in the garden for another after that. The crocuses were purple and white, the colors Gloria had chosen because she said they were the colors of endurance. Camille received a suspended sentence of 4 years and was ordered to complete community service, counseling, and supervised probation. Her cooperation had been substantial, and the court recognized it. She did not escape consequence. She lost her teaching position at Piedmont Middle School, her marriage, and a portion of her freedom for the duration of her probation. She would carry the weight of her choices for the rest of her life, but she was not in prison. And on the mornings when I am honest with myself, I acknowledge that this was, in part, because I had chosen to build a case that gave the truth room to breathe and gave her room to step into it. That was not leniency. That was strategy in service of something I believe, that the goal of justice is not maximum punishment. The goal of justice is the restoration of truth. It has been 7 months since that 3 a.m. phone call from Harold Green. 7 months since I sat in a LabCorp waiting room holding an orange prescription bottle in both hands, alone in the fluorescent light, unable to open an envelope. I take no supplements now other than the ones Dr. Okafor prescribes directly, dispensed from a pharmacy I trust. I have changed the locks on the house on Morningside Drive, not out of fear, but because it was the appropriate thing to do. I have dinner with Harold every Thursday at Mimosa Grill, and we have not missed a Thursday since January. My relationship with Camille is a careful, slow-moving thing. We speak on the phone once a week. We have met for coffee twice, in a public place, with no expectations on either side beyond honesty. She is in therapy. She is doing the work. Whether we rebuild something solid enough to be called a relationship in the full sense, I do not know yet. I am 64 years old, and I have learned that the honest answer to some questions is simply, not yet. But I am alive, and I am standing, and I am still, in the ways that matter, the man that Gloria loved and the man that 35 years of medicine shaped me to be. I did not let grief become bitterness. I did not let betrayal become hatred. I did not become something smaller than what this situation asked me to be. That is the only victory I was ever really chasing. My mother, Ernestine Whitfield, used to say something when I was a boy growing up in Greensboro, something she said so often I could hear it in her voice. Before she finished the sentence, "Baby, time is the only thing that can't be faked." She meant that patience reveals the truth about everything, about people, about intentions, about love. You can fake urgency. You can fake generosity. You can fake love for a season. But time strips everything down to what it actually is. Those supplements were in my cabinet for weeks. The plan that produced them had been in the making for months, maybe longer. And in the end, it was time. Harold's trained eye at a Thursday dinner, the accumulation of fatigue and dizziness over weeks, the slow and careful documentation of truth over 14 days. That undid everything Darnell had constructed. Time always tells the truth. My mother was right. She usually was. To whoever is watching this tonight, wherever you are, whatever time it is in your city, I want you to hear this directly. Protect your peace with the same energy that you protect the people you love. Your intuition is a form of wisdom. Fatigue that doesn't make sense is a signal worth listening to. And if someone in your life is a little too interested in whether you are taking your medication, in what your doctor said at your last visit, in what your estate documents look like, pay attention, not with paranoia, with the quiet, clear-eyed attention that you owe yourself. You are worth protecting. Your story is not finished. And the truth, however long it takes, always finds its way to the surface. I am Raymond Elias Whitfield. I am 64 years old. I am a father, a physician, a friend, and a man who is still standing. And I am grateful for Harold Green, for Reginald Ashworth, for the crocuses in Gloria's garden, and for every one of you who stayed with me tonight through this story. If this reached something in you, if it gave you something you needed, share it with someone tonight. Subscribe to this channel and leave your like so that more people can find stories like this one. Stories about dignity holding its ground. Stories about truth winning. Not quickly, not easily, but completely. We will see each other in the next one.